Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is Louise Doughty, the woman behind some of the knottiest thrillers to grace our bookshelves and TV screens in recent years. Her bestseller, Apple Tree Yard, about a sensible middle-aged woman who makes a very unsensible decision involving sex in the House of Commons, sold over 500,000 copies and was turned into a smash hit BBC series starring Emily Watson. She was also the brains behind the breathtaking BBC drama Crossfire that starred Keeley Hawes. Of course, what you don't hear is that Apple Tree Yard was Louise's 7th novel, which catapulted her to the big time, as they say, at the age of 50.
To me, the rewards of getting older hugely outweigh the debits of it. I just love it. I've never been happier than I am now.
Her latest book, A Bird in Winter, looks set to continue that trajectory. Think the 39 steps if the lead was an extremely resourceful 50-something woman on the run. Louise joined me to talk about how her overnight success at 50 transformed her life. Mainly, she finally started a pension. And why it's still considered controversial when middle-aged women have sex. We also discuss surviving the menopause-puberty collision, the unrealised fury and potential of the middle-aged woman, and the power and importance of realising you're not for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, you had written, oh God, I'm not going to get this right now. Was Apple Tree Yard your 7th book?
It's 7th, yes, yeah.
And so how was that? What change did that make in terms of your working, that you went from like moderately successful writer to 500,000 copies, oh God, I said then I forgot her name, Emily Watson starring,
yeah.
As many people watched it as watched The Night Manager, I mean, it was huge. What kind of difference did that make to your work life?
I mean, on the one hand, there was a practical difference, which was for the first time in my career, I could be a full-time writer, because up until...
Not full-time?
No, I was doing part-time teaching gigs. I was doing journalism, broadcasting. And I mean, I didn't have a day job in the normal sense of the word. I was always freelance, whatever I did. But there was never a point up until Apple Tree Yard where I thought, right, I can now earn my living as a writer. Never. And Apple Tree Yard was the first time when I went, okay, I don't want to do that teaching gig. I can turn it down. And obviously that is the most enormous privilege, because that's true of a tiny percentage of writers. Even really successful writers don't earn a living solely from writing. So there was that. There was certainly the weight of expectation after the success of Apple Tree Yard. And I think that was particularly potent because I'm published by Faber, which is a relatively small independent house. If you're published by one of the big conglomerates, then you know that they're making their real money out of gardening books and cookery books. And as a novelist, you're kind of small fry. Whereas when you're published by somebody like Faber and you do, for the first time in your career, start earning a bit of money, that felt quite potent to me, a certain responsibility. I think what I felt mostly was a real gratitude, not so much for the money, because really all I did with the money was start a pension, which I'd never had before.
How grown up. Were you 50 then?
I know, really grown up, boring. I was 50 when did I publish it? Yeah, I was 50 in the year I published Apple Tree Yard, and I had not one penny of savings or pension. I'd lived entirely hand to mouth. And up until that point, I had never had more than 3 months' money in the bank. That was my float, 3 months of what I needed to pay the mortgage and put food on the table. That was it. And I had got used to the idea that I'm okay for 3 months. After that, who knows? Maybe defaulting.
Yeah. I mean, that's
so suddenly,
more than some people have, but it's hairy, isn't it? It's hairy to be at a point where our parents' generation were retiring with their pensions and everything, and knowing that. I mean, I don't think I'll ever retire.
No, I don't think I will either. I suppose that's a way of explaining that the money wasn't transformative. The money was psychological. What it gave me, there was not, I didn't, buy myself so much as a new pair of socks with the money. It all went towards making myself secure. The ways in which Apple Tree Yard was transformative were much more in my attitude to my work and my writing. I can turn down other jobs. I can maybe take more risks, even though obviously the pressure is on to follow up a best-selling novel with another best-selling. Actually, it's a wonderful feeling to feel secure, and also to feel this much I have done. Having a book that finds its place in what you might call the literary landscape or with readers is you think, well, whatever else happens in my career after that much I've done, and the rest you just cross your fingers for. And lots of really, really good writers never get that.
It's the other thing I think is quite interesting that it did, and I did wonder how you felt about it. It seems like it consolidated your position on the shelves in terms of what your books looked like and how they were sold. And I'm a bit obsessed with how books are sold anyway, because looking back through your career, you were sold like my early books were, like Pink, with scripty writing, even though that bore no relation to the contents of the book at all.
Yes.
So thereby you just, the people who might like it don't buy it, and the people who do buy it are pissed off because they don't like it, because it doesn't, the contents and the jacket don't match. Quite. And the way you're packaged now, 100%. It does match, absolutely. But I noticed that they went back and repackaged your older ones, so they all had that Apple Tree Yard vibe.
Yes, that was quite funny. My first 5 books were published by Simon & Schuster, and as you say, my very serious book about mental illness and sexual betrayal had a misty picture of a woman with her head cut off. She was off the top running.
Oh yeah, the headless woman, always the headless woman.
The headless woman in a lovely flowery dress. And then everything was repackaged like Apple Tree Yard. Including Stone Cradle, which is a book about my traveller ancestry in rural Cambridgeshire. That was packaged like Apple Tree Yard. For readers. It's interesting to hear you say you're obsessed with how books are sold, because I am too, a bit. And I have sat on prize panels where books have come in and one of the other judges has said, oh, I don't know why the publisher sent us this crap, because of the cover.
Yeah, they haven't even
read it.
Yeah, I have to.
You feel like saying that, actually read it, because books are marketed, and I don't blame publishers, they're commercial businesses, they've got to earn a living, but books are marketed to be sold in a way that the publisher thinks they will sell. And the yawning chasm between the way books are marketed and what actually is between the covers is often huge. And I've read some wonderful, wonderful books that have come with, gold embossed lettering and some real drivel that's come looking very serious. And I think I wish there was a wider understanding that the way that a book is marketed within the industry is not a value judgment. And that you make the value judgment on one thing only, which is the quality of the book when you actually read the words on the page. I think as well, to me, it is a gender-related question. I think
always, yeah.
Certainly, women writers are, of course, always more likely to be published with the pink swirly lettering or the woman running through the orchard in the summer flowery dress. That goes without saying. But I think even beyond that, I think there's more of a sense that a woman writer must be categorized in a way that a male writer is not. One of the reasons why I really love my Faber editor, Louise Doughty, is she joined Faber after I'd published several books with them. And I went into the editorial meeting on Platform 7, which was the first book of mine she edited. And, that's a weird book. It's partly a thriller. It's partly a ghost story. It's partly a love story. It's set mostly on Peterborough railway station. Yes, it's a strange book. And I said with some trepidation, how will you market this? What is it? And she looked me in the eye and she said very firmly, it's the new Louise Doughty novel. That's what it is. And I thought, joy. I love you.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it was such a joy. And she said, look, when a new Sebastian Faulks comes out or a new William Boyd, there is not the same pressure to say, what genre does this fall in? It's the new Sebastian Faulks or it's the new William Boyd. Now, they are very readable mass market literary writers as well. William Boyd, I mean, Ordinary Thunderstorms is a crime caper, but there's not the same pressure. I think, Faber have been brilliant at that, I have to say. And I'm very grateful for them refusing the pressure to market me in a particular category. And obviously people do refer to my stuff as thrillers, but Faber certainly don't go for the very heavy duty thrillerish cover. They go for sort of quite nice sui generis things. But I think I'm lucky.
Yeah, it certainly isn't everybody's experience, but I suppose you've dodged it as well. I mean, you don't write in a box, but that, then having a publisher who lets you, in inverted commas, not write in a box is another thing. But like you say, nobody expects William Boyd to write in a box. We could be here all day on that.
We really could.
When I was doing a bit of background research, I must have noticed this at the time, but I was really surprised by how transgressive all the media seemed to find Appletree Yard. I know, God. It's like eye roll, massive eye roll. It's like a middle-aged woman had sex, and yes, she had sex with someone within minutes of meeting them, but it was like, oh my God, did that even occur to you when you were writing it?
Absolutely not. I had no idea that was going to be so controversial. It was something I took for granted. I mean, obviously, thing about having sex very quickly with somebody I knew was, but the focus was definitely on not so much the type of sex Yvonne has, but middle-aged woman has sex, shock horror. And the coverage was jaw-dropping, whole articles, whole double-page spreads about middle-aged sex with pictures of Emily Watson and Ben Chaplin, who starred in the TV series. One newspaper commissioned a middle-aged man on one side and a middle-aged woman on this side, and they had a kind of head-to-head. It went tabloid. There was a piece in The Sun, Who is Louise Doughty? Everything you need to know about the author of Appletree Yard. I mean, that really did surprise me. I had no idea I was doing something remotely revolutionary, but apparently I was.
So bizarre, isn't it? I mean, I kind of I've started to think of your heartland, if you like, as I think this is a phrase I heard you use in an interview, the unrealised fury of the middle-aged woman.
And also the unrealised potential of the middle-aged woman. And, the thing that we're all incredibly familiar with, of getting to a certain age and feeling to a certain extent discardable. I mean, the famous Hollywood sketch, have you had your last fuckable day yet? Oh, yeah. the Hollywood actors. I think the irony is as well in that, but I think many women, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but have never felt better at this age. I mean, I'm about to be 60 and I've never felt stronger, more independent. I've never felt so happy in my own skin. So I think for me, the thing that is so wonderful about this age is actually just refusing to care, just really not caring about that, and feeling that there's just more time now. I mean, in my case, I've got children who are adults now. There's less demands on my time. But I think even without that, there's just a sense that, to me, the rewards of getting older hugely outweigh the debits of it. I just love it. I've never been happier than I am now.
No, I agree. I so much agree. Did your menopause coincide with, well, it must have done, it must have coincided with your success.
Funnily enough, it did, yes. Although I'm not actually sure when my menopause happened, because I had a disease called adenomyosis, which is sort of... did you?
I know hardly anybody who has had it. Tell me about yours.
Yeah, well, it was, I didn't know quite what was going on. Lots of ghastly symptoms. And in actual fact, I was referred for a biopsy for womb cancer. That was what they thought I had. And adenomyosis often mimics the symptoms of cancer of the womb. when they first told me, I was just kind of relieved that I didn't have cancer. And then I went, what the hell is that? I've never
Yeah.
heard of it.
No, I haven't
And of course,
either.
it's related to endometriosis, although
Yeah.
it's not as dreadful as endometriosis. And also, what was bizarre was they said that it is a disease of younger women, and that the cure for adenomyosis is the menopause. Once you're through it, then you're okay. So I still don't really understand from that period of my life what was adenomyosis, what was menopause, what was this strange upheaval that occurred when Apple Tree Yard was published. I mean, it was a very disruptive time. But I do know that it was ghastly in terms of my kind of emotional stability. And I suppose that's another reason why I'm enjoying hurtling towards 60, because to be through all that, I felt a bit as though that period of my life was a kind of reverse adolescence. You know, we're all familiar with the idea that adolescence is just a nightmare of hormones and uncertainty. And I think that, you know, the end of that particular middle period of your life is too. And I couldn't be more grateful to be through it. And looking back on it, I now realize just how bad it was. And it coincided with having teenage children and my parents dying, which was a very full on and difficult time. So, yeah, it was not fun a few years ago.
I mean, I think that's one of the things, isn't it? It's the maelstrom of things that are happening in your life. That's the thing, is it can be quite hard to strip out, like, oh, well, I hate this phrase, I'll use it just for the purposes of this, empty nest syndrome, yuck, versus, you know, losing or caring for elderly parents, versus maybe, you know, starting to feel dismissed at work, plus menopause. What of those things? What's what? You kind of, I say, came into money like it was given to you. That's not the case. But at a point when that kind of can become a massive concern as well, if you're like, well, I might only have 10 more years working, I've got no pension.
Yeah, very much so. And there was a whole phase in the run up to Apple Tree Yard where the favour rights department did a brilliant job of selling the rights. They had a fantastic director at the time who sold me in 30 territories while it was the run up to publication, while all this other stuff was going on in my personal life. And things would be really bad. And then Lisa from Faber would call up and said, "Oh, say we've had an offer from I don't know, Lithuania or somewhere." I would email her and say thank you, and she would say, "Oh, it's so nice. You know, you always say thank you." And I felt like saying, "You have no idea how grateful I am because all this stuff is happening." I mean, I think maelstrom is really the right word. Apple Tree Yard was the thing that kind of kept me sane, because the success of that book, it was like somebody saying, hang on in there, you know, this, whatever else is going on, this is going well. Keep at it, you know, keep doing what you're good at, keep working hard, and it will come good. And indeed it did. So yes, you're right. I mean, the timing of Apple Tree Yard could not have been more perfect in terms of rescuing me from the maelstrom.
So you said you had teenage daughters at the same time. How old were they when you were right in the depths of this? About 15-ish?
I can't actually remember. There's a 5-year gap between them.
I always think when people talk a lot about their teenagers and how awful they were, I do always think, are they listening?
Well, my two are utterly gorgeous. I have to say, I'm grateful for them every day. And particularly now they're in their 20s and they look after me rather than the other way around. So I count myself, I count myself very lucky on two fronts, really. I'm lucky career-wise, and I'm lucky with them too.
Oh, you trained them well. I noticed you described having grown-up children as having all the responsibility, still having all the responsibility and none of the power. And I thought that was a perfect description, because you've still got, haven't you? You still feel exactly the same way.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is why you have to try really, really hard to let them go, because, you know, you can't hang on to these people. They are grown-ups now. They have their own lives to lead. And that, you know, that's not easy. But one of my children lives abroad now. So she's obviously very independent. They're both working. They're both in partnerships. You know, You just have to come to a point, you say, that's it. I think in some senses I found it helpful as a writer as well, because I think the thing is you're reminded that ultimately the story is not about you. You are a bit part in someone else's story. I once heard my girls having a discussion where one of them was saying to the other, but I'm me and you're the sister. And the other going, no, you're the sister. I'm me, you're the sister. And I loved that, because that is how we all feel. I mean, we are all the heroes and heroines of our own particular story. And the other people are either principal players or minor parts or walk-ons. But of course, that's true for everybody. And it's quite healthy to be reminded of that, I think.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I've just actually read a book where one of the characters, basically her sister, after she splits up with her boyfriend, although I think there was an overlap, her sister goes out with him and her sister ends up marrying him. And at the end of the book, she reaches a point where she realizes, I can't say what the book is because it would be a massive spoiler, but at the end of the book, she realizes that actually this is not theirs, it's not my story. I'm just a small part in their story. And I think that struck me as really interesting. I don't know whether I've even now fully grasped that, actually. How old do you think you were when you grasped that it isn't all your story?
That's an interesting question. I think, some people never grasp it.
Yeah,
it has
true.
to be said. Some people, i.e. men, no, that's unfair, but
not all, but a lot.
I think not all, but a lot. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. I think that probably older than I should have been, but maybe that's true for everybody. I think that particularly there is something about being a writer. I mean, even before I was a writer professionally, I was a bit of what one of my daughters once called a sad weirdo loser loner type person.
Yeah.
I was always in the library. I was always reading books. I was on my own a lot. I didn't have a big friendship group. And I think that writers are constitutionally the kind of people who are used to living inside their own heads a lot. And if you do that, you have to work at having a sense of perspective. Because I think part of the business of creating a whole imaginary world of a novel, that kind of absorption in that world, when your fingers are touching the keys of the keyboard, there is a psychological trick you pull on yourself where you do believe this world is real. It is as if it's really happening and you're absorbed in it. And then you look up from the computer and the doorbell goes and it's the postman, or you go and take the chicken out of the freezer, or a family member rings. It is psychologically healthy to be aware of your own insignificance. Because I think if you become too grandiose, it affects your ability to edit your work. It makes the work less good. But that is why writers go so crazed around publication, really, because for 3 years, they've created this whole world or more, which is everything. And then, the publisher has it and it goes through the editing process and it comes out, and some reviews are good and some are bad. And you go into a bookshop and you realize all you've done is written a book. The world has not been transformed. You have not made the world. You've just written a book, like thousands of other books. And that's a sobering, if necessary, moment.
Hello there. Welcome to Sketch.
Welcome to Sketch Out Loud, where we invite you on a journey to explore the many hidden rooms and experiences within this 18th century townhouse at 9 Conduit Street in the heart of London. Opened in 2002 by restaurateur Mourad Mazouz and master chef Pierre Gagnère, Sketch is a destination for food, music, drink and art. Meet our chefs, artists, designers, guests, and many more who have contributed to the ever-developing story of Sketch over the past 2 decades. Listen and follow now wherever you find your podcasts. Sketch. Eat, music, drink, art.
You, like me, are part of the generation of women who I suppose, made their way professionally and personally in the 80s, I suppose, maybe early 90s. What was that like for you?
Yes, I was talking about this with a journalist friend only the other day, the sort of boom time of the 90s. There was a proper living to be earned I was theatre critic of the Mail on Sunday for a while. I my living at that for 2 years and managed to save up enough to buy my first flat, which is unthinkable now. It was good fun. I think certainly don't look at it through rose-tinted spectacles because it was still incredibly sexist and indeed racist. Black writers could only get published if they were writing about urban difficulties. Mm-hmm. I remember a headline in the Mail when Crazy Paving came out. It was shortlisted for a few prizes, including the John Lennon Rees Prize, but it was entered for the Betty Trusk Prize, a first novel award. And one of the judges wrote a leader piece in the Daily Mail, and the headline, and I promise I'm not making this up, the headline was, "Why are our young women novelists so filthy and disgusting?" And yours truly was singled out as a particularly filthy and disgusting example. And because I used swear words in my book. And the article went on to complain that young women nowadays never wear pretty summer blouses. They dress in tracksuits and trainers and swear all the time. They're indistinguishable from boys. And I mean, it seems incredible now. Even remembering it, you think it must have been something out of the 70s or even the 50s. But no, this was after Crazy Paving was published in 1995. So I think, although I had fun and I earned money to get on the property ladder in London, which is no small thing, I look back now and I think I don't really realise what I was up against in terms of the sexism of the time, particularly within the book world and within the literary world. And of course, my generation and your generation is the generation that crossed over from the discovery of the internet, ebook, the end of the netbook agreement. We are that transition generation. And, when I was first published, a sales might mean you took the people at Foyles to lunch, for the sales director, or you got a few copies in libraries, the whole marketing strategies. Now we have Twitter and Instagram, the ebook revolution, all of those things have happened during the course of my career. So there's been a huge amount of change. Most of it for the better, I would say. Not all, but most of it for the better.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's not for the better is, like you say, you can no longer really earn a living from making words. And you could in the late 80s, early 90s, you could.
You could, yes. And I mean, the problem with, what is the average earning for a published writer now? Is it 7,000?
Something like that.
Yeah. Something like that. And that's for published successful writers. And the trouble is that if you reach that situation, it's really anti-diversity, it's anti-opportunity. It means that we end up with a literary culture in the same way you have an acting culture with people who have other means of support through spouses or wealthy parents. And, how is a new working class writer supposed to earn a living? How is somebody from a non-literary background supposed to break through? And I mean, it's always been difficult, but I think it is very difficult now. And I'm not quite sure what the solution is to that.
Yeah, I mean, I have often, probably for the last 20 years, because I come from a similar background to you, small town kid, ordinary family. And, for a good 20 years, I have thought that no one from my background would be able to, do what I did and manage to, that used to get paid enough temping, doing someone else's typing to pay rent in London, and all those ways, those sideways in, they've all gone.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Very hard to see how our equivalent nowadays gets to break through.
I mean, your characters are all broadly, I say you and me, but obviously they're not, but they're kind of coming from where we're coming from. They're part of that generation, that age group, that what I kind of think of as women who probably have reached a point where they've got a lot of experience and they're still constantly underestimated, but they're probably generationally at a point where they're like, fuck that. Not going to put up with that. I mean, whether it's Yvonne in Apple Tree Yard or the fabulous Jo, and I'm so jealous about Keeley Hawes because I've got a massive girl crush on her, and Lisa and Platform 7 and Heather or Bird in your new book. I mean, they're all very different in that I mean, please tell me if I'm wrong, that Jo was a character really who had kind of talked herself out of believing she was competent, and she was spectacularly competent when it came down to it. You know, Lisa had just made the kind of error of judgment that, frankly, we all make, and most of us have made to a lesser or greater degree. And Heather is another middle-aged woman in a tight spot, although vastly more competent than I think I would be. Is that something that you're really into exploring, or do they just write them? Do they just walk in, these women?
They come easily to me, and I think you're so right. They are all women who may have varying levels of competence, but once they are put in a stressful or difficult situation, they have to discover that they're more competent than other people have thought, and maybe they have thought themselves. And I mean, in the case of Yvonne in Apple Tree Yard, she's a very conventional woman when you first meet her, and she makes this one rash decision with a man, and the whole of her life spinned out of control. But Jo in Crossfire is somebody who has left the police 15 years previously because she thought as you say, she convinced herself she was no good at it. And then when in a situation where her family are threatened, she's got to really discover just how good at it she is. Bird, I think, is similar but different, and that you're right, she's definitely the most competent of all my heroines. And there was a funny thing at the beginning of each book, because I tend to write female first-person narratives, I always have to ask myself a question, which is, how am I going to make this woman different from myself? Because I really don't want, I'm not writing autofiction. I really don't want to write novel after novel. I think we can safely say I will never write a novel that's about a novelist living in North London. That is just not going to happen. So with Yvonne, I made her a scientist. And I mean, having got an E at O-level chemistry, that was definitely very different from me. And with Bird, it was very much a matter of making her physically competent, because she's somebody who has to go on the run, but she's somebody who has to defend herself physically and has to climb across roofs and has to do physical things. And that's very different from me. I'm completely hopeless. I've got 2 left feet, a really poor sense of balance. I can't even go for a jog around the block without falling over. So I decided that I would give her an army background, and I would make her somebody whose father had been, as she thinks, in the army, but as it turns out, in the secret services, who goes into the army straight from university, who's very passionate, who wants to be a good army officer. But she's the generation 10 years or so older than us that wasn't even allowed to go to Sandhurst, that training in the 1970s. And some of the details that are in A Bird in Winter, you know, it's true. Women who were training were taught flower arranging so that they could make the mess room nice for the male soldiers. You know, that was their job.
It's unbelievable,
and then
isn't
it is. And relatively recent. It was only in the 80s that women were allowed to go to Sandhurst. So I did speak to a couple of retired lieutenant colonels from the army, women, a woman I'd been to school with who found me some women 10 years older who were of that generation. And then I worked very hard to make Bird somebody who would cope on her own when she was on the run and when she was being pursued. And I went up to Scotland myself with a rucksack on my back and went on her journey. Although it has to be said, I didn't break into any houses and I didn't cross the North Sea illegally on a yacht. I did sleep in a comfortable bed every night.
I was going to say, you tell me you didn't sleep rough. Yeah.
No, I did not sleep rough, but I did go walking on my own. I did go hiking in some quite remote areas where there was no phone signal. And, you know, I'm not a brave person and I'm not a physically competent person. If anything had happened, I doubt very much I could have got myself out of it in the way that Bird can in A Bird in Winter. And there were times when I was out hiking on my own, and it was pretty spooky. Naturally a timid person, so that was quite a challenge.
But surely, please tell me nobody has actually asked you if there's any of you in Bird.
Not yet.
Oh, please, God.
Not yet. No. I did have my favourite answer when Apple Tree Yard came out. Occasionally, hesitantly, interviewers or people at literary events would put their hand up and sort of say timidly, I just wanted to know how much of Apple Tree Yard is autobiographical. And of course, what they really wanted to know is, had I had an affair? Had I had sex in public places?
Yeah, have you had sex up an alley? Yeah.
Yeah, up an alley. And I would give them a very level look and say, you want to know if I have ever really been one of the nation's top geneticists?
Yeah.
And that generally covered that. No, not yet. Although I'm waiting for the review that complains that Bird isn't likable enough. That one always makes me want to thump my forehead on the table.
I mean, it's got a bit better, hasn't it? But it seems like you're only allowed to, it feels like now you're allowed to write an unlikable character, but that they have to be unlikable in a way that's approved of, in a way that,
Yes.
That fits the kind of either the psychological thriller bill or the sad girl lit bill,
Yes.
like they can't, and Bird doesn't fit either of those models.
No, she's quite uptight. She's somebody who doesn't relate well to other people. She's fallen out with her closest, oldest friend. She's never married or had children. And I felt very passionately about that I wanted to write that woman, and also to write a woman who was perfectly happy that she'd never had children. I didn't want the novel to become about, a woman feeling life had passed her by. Life has not passed Bird by. She's been very successful in her career. She is somebody who, because of her rather complicated emotional upbringing, is self-protective.
Yeah, it's interesting because the number of women that I've spoken to for this podcast who actually very recently who have not in relationships but unmarried and made the decision not to have children and have said that it has been used against them, particularly people in slightly more professional conservative industries, that it's a cause for suspicion, which I think, when you work in a creative industry, maybe you get lulled into a slight sense of false security where that's concerned.
Yes, I think that's true. And also I feel very passionately that we all have parallel lives. Somebody who hasn't had children and wanted them might from time to time think about the parallel life they could have had if they'd had them. But I think we need to be honest, and as somebody who has been lucky enough to have children, I also have a parallel life, the life I would have led if I hadn't had them, in an immaculate white flat with beautiful bed linen and an armchair upon which fell a lot of natural light, in which I would read many, many books.
All the money you wouldn't have spent on them.
Yes, oh my God, yeah. I think that it behoves us all to be honest that no life is perfect, that all life choices that we make and all lives we end up with have parallel lives, have other things we could have done, other roads we could have taken. And it's a bit of a tragedy that we only get one life, don't we? We just get the life we're given. An awareness of that is such a gift for a novelist, because I think it enables you to create all sorts of other characters and hopefully to make that imaginative leap and not to write novel after novel with characters who just have your life experience. I mean, I've never wanted to do that, and I hope I never will.
How are your rage levels?
Much better now. I think, after that question 10 years ago, you would have got a very different answer.
I'm very interested in anger, and actually I completely agree with what you've just said. I feel like I'm through that kind of unfettered rage stage. And I still feel very angry about some things, but it tends to be much more focused and much more productive. But I'm really interested in, and also wary actually of it becoming a cliche about the middle-aged woman going from the kind of hot and a bit irritable to actually being like a full-on rage monster. And I think it would be easy for that to be, that's a weirdly palatable unlikability that we can cope with.
Yes, and it's like every truth becomes a cliche. I mean, the goalposts move. To start off with, people deny that, and women are supposed to be lovely and sweet, and then we're angry, and then we demand that our anger gets recognized. And then I think you're absolutely right, that there can become a point where that just becomes another stereotype, a kind of furious middle-aged woman. And then suddenly everybody starts saying, oh, we're all talking too much about that. And then there's the kind of backlash against that. And these things always come in waves. I think the only thing we can try to do is to try and ensure that the younger generation of women, I mean, I think progress is always 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And if you're unlucky, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You know, it always comes like waves on the shore, and you just have to hope that the tide's coming in rather than out. I think it behoves us to think about the next generation of the women. I also do think we have a duty to not get too depressed and check out. Because I think, particularly if you look in terms of global politics, the rise of populism, if you look at Johnson, Trump, Le Pen in France, and you think all these movements, which are proto-fascist movements, which our generation believed were consigned to history. Our parents were the ones who fought the Second World War. Our parents fought Hitler. And there was this feeling, I think, that, that the arc of history was always bending towards greater democracy, greater openness. We saw the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Soviet Union. There was this kind of essential optimism to our lives during a crucial period. And I think if you look at what's happened now in terms of global politics, it's very easy to just go, good Lord, it's all gone to rat shit. There's this whole new populist right. It's time for me to just check out and sit in a corner and feel fed up and curmudgeonly and complain that everything is awful and I'll do my own little thing. But that is a betrayal of the young people to come. Nihilism is a luxury we cannot afford. And I think we have to make whatever small and paltry contribution we can to continuing to fight against reactionary forces and to continuing to make the world a better place for the next generation. Because we've had it lucky in many ways. Economically, we are the era of, I went to university on a full grant, as did my siblings. We had our fees paid by Leicestershire Council and a full grant. And we were able to buy houses. We can't just sit back and go, it's all gone to rat shit, I'm checking out. That's not fair. We have had advantages, and we do need to see how we can pass on some of those advantages to the younger generation. Sorry, I'm sounding a bit soapboxy now.
No, you're not. But I agree. The idea that, thinking, say, for instance, it's about mortgages. I don't know if you must have been in the same position with having somewhere last time negative equity happened and kind of it dropping 30 or 40% of its value. Somebody said to me the other day, it's like, yes, but for people who have managed to get on the property ladder, they probably already have properties that are 10 times their income. And that's the difference. So yes, the mortgage rate went into double figures in the 80s and we were all royally fucked. We didn't have mortgages that were 10 times our salary. And that's, it's a mess. And we didn't do anything right to deserve being able to afford to buy a house, and they haven't done anything wrong to be able to afford not to.
Absolutely. And I think the yawning chasm in housing inequality in this country is one of our greatest scandals, one of many. And you see it particularly in areas like the Southwest, the second homes crisis, and the idea that there's a huge swathe of people who can afford a second home while lots of people who can't afford any, the degradation of council housing stock under Thatcher and the utter failure to replace it with the housing stock that we need. And, housing inequality is just fundamental to all sorts of other inequalities as well. So that's one we really have to fix.
Before I ask you the questions that I always ask, I just want to ask you about the role of female friendship in your life and how it's changed as you got older? Because I noticed that you have dedicated A Bird in Winter to Ruby, who is Jill, the novelist Jill Dawson. And you actually dedicated Platform 7 to Andrea Levy, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes. Well, it's hugely important, as you can tell by both of those dedications. I was able to tell Andrea that I was dedicating the book to her before she died. She died before it came out, sadly for me. She died in February of that year, and the book came out in August. But I had made that decision and was able to tell her. And in fact, there's a scene in Platform 7 where one of the friends makes a rather disastrous cake for another, which is based on a cake I took Andrea when she was ill, which we had a good laugh about because it was an absolutely disastrous cake. And obviously that was very important to me, and particularly because the subject matter of that book was about what we leave behind us when we die and about the different sort of loves we have. I do feel that society is always pressurizing women to think that romantic love is the be-all and end-all. And in actual fact, our lives are full of all sorts of other loves for children or parents or work colleagues. But chief amongst those is the love we feel for our friends. And my female friends have quite literally saved my life over my years. And Jill Dawson, to whom, as you rightly say, A Bird in Winter is dedicated, is one of my closest friends. We've grown up together as novelists. We got to know each other when we were 2 or 3 books in. And she is the kind of friend you dream about when you're at school. One minute we're having a very earnest discussion about, narrative style, and the next we're ordering the second round of cocktails. She's the kind of friend you can do everything with. You can be at once intimate and intellectual and serious, and at once frivolous and supportive. And that was important because A Bird in Winter is really about a woman whose great love is her closest female friend. Although they've not had a sexual affair, it is certainly the biggest love of her life. And then when it goes awry, probably the biggest sadness of her life. So that felt appropriate as well. And no, you're absolutely right. I mean, female friendship is just essential, I think. It's as part of the fabric of my life. It's really the building blocks, I think, of my life.
Has its importance changed as you've got older?
Yes, it's broadened. I mean, when you're in the child-rearing years, you tend to naturally gravitate towards women who have children of similar age of your own. And then I think you pass through those years, you're able in a way to rediscover women who are in maybe a different position yourself. And that's really lovely. But also to feel that you have a small handful of friends with whom you have this very long history. And I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I've got several close friends that I've known for decades now, and that's just terrific.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, definitely whenever I've been at a thing that you've been at, I don't think I've ever seen you without Jill. In the same kind of orbit, not like glommed onto each other, but like in the vicinity of.
Yes. That's true. We do go out together a lot. And then we enjoy the postmortems the next day. Yeah. That's very true. Although she lives out in the Fens, which is where most of her novels are set, in the Cambridgeshire Fens. So she has a very different style of life to me. But that's quite nice in its way as well. I can stay with her in this village in the middle of nowhere, and then she can stay with me when she comes to London. So that's useful too.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the questions that I always ask.
Okay.
What's your emotional age?
Oh, crikey. Now, that is a tricky one because it varies probably from day to day. I would say my emotional age is probably, God, I'm really struggling now. No, it's probably pretty much where I'm at, I think.
Why is that, do you think?
I think it goes back to what we were discussing before about being postmenopausal. I mean, I was about to say that my emotional age was younger, 40s or 50s, because I like to think of myself as having a younger outlook, precisely because I have children in their 20s. And I think that I'm constantly being brought short by them and challenged by them. But I think my emotional age is certainly not the perimenopausal age.
Yeah.
I think I'm definitely post. I think I've reached a certain equilibrium. So yeah, I'm pretty much where I'm at.
Give us a book recommendation. So it can be one of those, like a book that's really shaped your life, or it can just be something that you've read lately that you've liked.
Books I've read lately, I've just read The Stirrings by Catherine Taylor, which I loved, which is a memoir set in Sheffield. And it's about her growing up in Sheffield during the time of the Yorkshire Ripper. And I went to Leeds University. When I applied to go, the Yorkshire Ripper was still on the loose, although he'd been caught by the time I arrived. But that particular time, and then the 1980s, Thatcherism, the miners' strike, living in the North-South divide, which was incredibly real and a very potent thing. And she also writes very well about pressures on young women and about an illness that she had that went undiagnosed for far too long. I do love memoirs by highly intelligent, accomplished women. Arifa Akbar's memoir, Consumed, is a wonderful book as well, all about her sister who died of tuberculosis. So a well-written literary memoir, I think, really, really gets my vote at the moment. So, I mean, one life isn't enough, as you know all too well, I'm sure. There's just the books. There's so many books that I know I'm going to live and die never reading. And it's tragic, really. There just isn't enough time.
No, you probably have the same thing as I do. I have an enormous pile of the stuff that I'm lucky enough to be sent, but then I buy stuff as well. I'm an obsessive book buyer. And then when I clear out, I save. I have a kind of a save because I will read that pile. And then about 3 months later, I have to gut the save because I will read that pile because I'm clearly never going to, because saving twice as much again.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you do that thing. I have books piled on my desk, close to my computer or on my bedside table. And I don't know what I'm thinking. Am I imagining that the contents of them might leak into my brain through osmosis? It's just as though their proximity will somehow help me absorb them.
Yeah, I think if I put them in a pile right there, they're somehow going to get to the top of the pile sooner, but they don't. I just get a bit blind to those piles as well. Yeah. First world problems. What advice would you give younger women?
Try and minimize the anxiety about what other people think about you. I won't say don't worry about it because it's not human. All young people, but particularly young women, it's very easy to spend too much time worrying what people think, and also trying to anticipate, trying to head off the idea that there's going to be somebody out there who doesn't like you. You're never going to be liked by everybody. And what kind of person would you be if you were liked by everybody? You'd just be a kind of hollow thing. So, try not to worry about what people think. Do what feels right for you.
I think that kind of, realizing and accepting that you're not for everyone. It's really, really important, isn't it? But it's so hard.
It's really hard. And still, even as a grown-up, shocking when something is reported back to you, or you overhear something and you realize somebody doesn't like you. It feels like that goes to your... And it's hard, but you have to say to yourself, guess what? I don't like everybody that I know. Why would I? So why would I expect everybody to like me? The ability to live with people occasionally taking against you or taking against your work, indeed. I think, that's a strong ability that everyone needs to develop.
Who is your old bird role model? So an older woman who inspires you?
Gosh, there's that whole generation of women writers. So Margaret Atwood, obviously. Hilary Mantel, I just adored. I was so sad when we lost her because I think she was unique. There was nobody like her.
I don't even know how old she was, actually.
She wasn't
70. As old as you think, was she?
No, she was 70. And Helen Dunmore, again, she was only 64, I think, when she died, far too young. I really revered her, and she was a friend as well as a novelist that I admired hugely. And then, there's a whole generation of feminists in America, and women like Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou, who just had the intersectional double whammy of sexual discrimination and race. And there are times when you just have to think, whatever it is I've dealt with, there's this whole raft of women who have fought a battle that I can probably only even begin to imagine. And, that kind of generation of women who are at the forefront, I think, are probably the ones that I admire most.
What's your superpower?
I'd like to be able to read people's minds.
Oh, would you though? Would you?
Yeah, I think that as a novelist, I mean, just imagine how great that would be. Maybe as a human being, less great.
Yeah.
But I think as a novelist, to be actually inside somebody's head and to know what they were really thinking, I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting. But I think it might be horrible.
It might be horrifying. Yeah,
maybe I just think the worst of people, though. It's like,
yeah.
Last one. How many fucks do you give?
Not quite 0, maybe 0.001. I still give a few little tiny fucks every now and then, but mostly pretty much 0. I'm trying to lose the few fucks I do give.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.
Hello there. Welcome to Sketch.
Welcome to Sketch Out Loud, where we invite you on a journey to explore the many hidden rooms and experiences within this 18th century townhouse at 9 Conduit Street in the heart of London. Opened in 2002 by restaurateur Murad Mazzouz and master chef Pierre Gagnère, Sketch is a destination for food, music, drink and art. Meet our chefs, artists, designers, guests, and many more who have contributed to the ever-developing story of Sketch over the past 2 decades. Listen and follow now wherever you find your podcasts. Sketch. Eat, music, drink, art.